But only storing the values is not useful by itself. We also need a way to retrieve these values to check whether a user is logged in and to get the auth information. Because we're going to use these keys from several places, we should refactor it to constants first. First, I define the auth key constant and refer to it instead. And then I do the same for the user key and refer to that instead. Okay, we can use these values from our read logic that we're going to code up now. We add a new function onto this class called getAuthInfo, which takes only one parameter, a callback function. Instead of calling multiset, we call, wait for it, multiget on the async storage service. We use an array again to specify that we want both the auth and user values retrieved. And again we specify a callback function, this time with an error parameter and a value parameter. If we experience an error, we just pass it on to the callback function passed to our getAuthInfo function up here. We do some sanity checking on the value and return an empty result if it was empty. This result of the async storage multiget is a bit weird. It looks very similar to what we passed in initially, a nested array. I want to return an object from this function and not let the callers of the auth service need to deal with nested arrays. Luckily, we can use the well-known Lodash library to quickly change the nested array to an object instead, but we need to install it first. On the command line, we type npm install lodash --save, ensuring that the dependency is recorded in the package.json file. Now we can just require it here at the top of the auth service file. Let's turn that nasty nested array into an object by passing it to the zip object function of Lodash. Another bit of sanity checking here. If this object does not contain the auth key, we pass an empty value back on the callback, because at the very least we expect that to be there, right? If we do have the expected data, we can now map it onto an object which will return to the caller of this function. We call this object authInfo. Because this authInfo will be used to make HTTP calls to the GitHub API, we do some of the repetitive work for the caller by creating the HTTP basic authentication header and returning that on a property called header. Next we return the user. For this value, we need to parse the string that we stored earlier from JSON back into an object. And lastly, I return this value onto the callback. We pass null on the first parameter to indicate that it was successful and did not experience an error. Now I'll show you how we'll use this persisted authInfo. We go back to the index file again, which acts as the root component in this app. In the getInitialState, we set up a new default value called checkingAuth, and this time we give it a true value. In the render function, I check this new variable. If the checkingAuth state is true, we return a new container view, which will contain an activity indicator, similar to what we did in the login component earlier. First we need to reference the activity indicator iOS component up here, and now we can reference it over here in the JSX, returned from the render function. We set its animating property to always be true, size to large, and give it a style which we can tweak if we want to. When I save that, you can see that the loader shows immediately. Now I'm going to show you how to call the auth service to check whether we should show the login screen or the logged in view. We want to do this before the component does anything else, so we add a component didMount function to the class, which is the correct place to put initialization logic which you want to execute only once after the component has been pulled in by React. Oh, I also need to pull in the auth service. Let's do that up here. Okay, back in the component didMount, we call the getAuthInfo function we created earlier. Remember, this function takes only one parameter, a callback function, which I specify now. The very first thing we do is update the checkingAuth state variable to false. Then we move on to setting the isLoggedIn value as a result of the authInfo being null or not. If it's null, this will be false. If it's got a value, it will be true. Now when we test that, it goes to the logged in view immediately, skipping the login screen altogether. Even if we close this app, and open it again, it will remember the user and go directly to this view. Not only is this a better experience for users, it also speeds up our development workflow because we won't need to log in after every single change that we want to test.